11:59. 1 minute before everything changes. Chosen. 1. Don't skip this part. Wait. Before you click away, before you tell yourself this is just another video, before you assume you've heard this message before, take a moment and listen carefully. Because what if this isn't an ordinary message? What if this is the confirmation you've been praying for? What if the reason you found this video at this exact moment has nothing to do with chance and everything to do with divine timing? Chosen one. There are thousands of videos online right now, thousands of voices competing for attention, thousands of messages people could be listening to. Yet somehow you're here, and deep down, something inside you feels different. You may not be able to explain it. You may not have the words for it, but something in your spirit said, listen. And that's exactly why you need to stay until the end. Because today's message is about a moment that very few people recognize when it arrives. A moment that often appears disguised as confusion, disguised as pressure, disguised as delay, disguised as uncertainty. A moment known in the spiritual realm as 11:59. 1 minute before everything changes. 1 minute before breakthrough. 1 minute before revelation. 1 minute before restoration. 1 minute before God reveals what He has been doing behind the scenes all along. And if you've been feeling unusual pressure lately, if you've been facing obstacles that seem to come from nowhere, if you've been wondering why the attacks have intensified, this message may explain exactly what's happening. Because one thing I've learned is this: the greatest breakthroughs are often preceded by the greatest battles. The biggest blessings are often hidden behind the hardest seasons, and the strongest warriors are usually forged in the hottest fires. Maybe that's why your journey has felt so difficult. Maybe that's why you've been carrying burdens nobody understands. Maybe that's why you've spent nights staring at the ceiling asking questions that never seemed to receive answers. You prayed. You waited, you trusted, you believed, yet the breakthrough didn't come when you expected it. The door didn't open when you thought it would. The miracle didn't arrive on your timeline. And if you're honest, there were moments when you questioned everything. Moments when disappointment tried to replace faith. Moments when exhaustion whispered, just give up. Moments when fear said, nothing is ever going to change. Moments when loneliness convinced you that heaven had forgotten your name. But chosen one, heaven never forgot you. Not for 1 second. Every prayer was heard. Every tear was counted. Every battle was witnessed. Every sacrifice was seen. And while you thought you were waiting on God, there were seasons when God was waiting on the perfect moment. Because timing matters. A farmer doesn't plant in winter. A builder doesn't place a roof before a foundation. And heaven doesn't release certain blessings until preparation is complete. That is one of the hardest lessons for chosen ones to understand. Because when you know you're called, when you know you're destined for something greater, when you know there's more inside you, waiting becomes painful. You can feel the promise. You can sense the purpose. You know something significant is ahead. Yet reality doesn't seem to match what your spirit feels, and that creates tension. A tension between where you are and where you're meant to be. A tension between your current reality and your future destiny. A tension that can sometimes feel unbearable. But what if that tension isn't a sign you're failing? What if it's a sign you're growing? Think about an arrow. Before an arrow can move forward, it must first be pulled backward. The farther it's pulled back, the farther it can eventually travel. And perhaps that's what's been happening in your life. Maybe the setbacks weren't punishment. Maybe the delays weren't rejection. Maybe the waiting wasn't abandonment. Maybe heaven was pulling you back for a greater launch, because chosen one. There are things God can do in a season of waiting that cannot happen any other way. Character is built there, wisdom is developed there, discernment is sharpened there, strength is formed there. Faith is tested there, and although nobody enjoys those seasons, they are often the very seasons that prepare us for everything we've been praying for. Imagine receiving the blessing before you're ready. Imagine walking through a door you don't yet have the wisdom to manage. Imagine receiving influence without maturity. Imagine receiving abundance without discipline. What feels like delay may actually be protection. Protection from moving too early. protection from stepping into something before you're prepared, protection from receiving a gift that would become a burden. And that's why today's message is so important. Because many chosen ones are misinterpreting the season they're currently in. They're looking at delay and calling it denial. They're looking at silence and calling it absence. They're looking at difficulty and calling it failure. But heaven sees something completely different. Heaven sees preparation. Heaven sees growth. Heaven sees transformation. Heaven sees alignment. Heaven sees someone becoming exactly who they need to be. And that someone is you. Now listen carefully, because this next part is crucial. One of the clearest signs that you're approaching spiritual 1159 is increased resistance. Most people assume resistance means they're moving in the wrong direction, but often the opposite is true. Resistance increases when you're moving towards something significant. Think about every great story. Before victory comes opposition. Before promotion comes testing. Before breakthrough comes pressure. Before resurrection comes darkness. And that's why many chosen ones suddenly find themselves facing battles they never expected. Relationships become complicated. Finances become strained. Opportunities seem delayed. Emotions become overwhelming. Unexpected challenges appear. And the temptation is to assume something must be wrong. But what if something is actually right? What if the pressure is evidence that movement is occurring? What if the shaking is evidence that old structures are being removed? What if the discomfort is evidence that transformation has begun? Because transformation is rarely comfortable. A caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly without struggle. A diamond isn't formed without pressure. Gold isn't purified without fire. And destiny isn't fulfilled without preparation. That's why you cannot judge your future based on your current circumstances. Your current circumstances are temporary. Your current season is temporary. Your current obstacles are temporary. But the purpose attached to your life is bigger than any temporary challenge. And that's something the enemy desperately wants you to forget. Because if you remembered who you truly are, if you remembered what you've already survived, if you remembered how many times God carried you through impossible situations, you would stop doubting your future. Think about it. You're still here. After everything you've faced, after every disappointment, after every betrayal, after every setback, after every heartbreak, after every attack, you're still standing. You may be tired, you may be wounded, you may be discouraged, but you're still here. And that's not an accident. Because people who are not meant to fulfill their purpose don't survive what you've survived. The very fact that you're listening right now is proof that your story is still being written. Proof that heaven isn't finished with you. Proof that there are chapters ahead that you've never imagined. Proof that the ending will be greater than the struggle. And chosen one, I believe many of you are about to enter one of the most important seasons of your lives. Not because life will suddenly become perfect, not because challenges will disappear, but because clarity is coming, answers are coming, direction is coming, confirmation is coming. Things that once confused you will begin making sense. Things that once hurt you will reveal hidden lessons. Things that once delayed you will reveal hidden purpose. And when that happens, you'll realize something extraordinary. You'll realize that God was working even when you couldn't see it. Working through closed doors. Working through disappointments. Working through detours. Working through delays. Working through every situation you thought was working against you. Because one of the greatest truths a chosen one can learn is this: God can use everything. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loss, the disappointment, the rejection, the waiting, the confusion. All of it. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is meaningless. Nothing is beyond redemption. And that's why you must not quit at 11:59. You must not walk away 1 minute before breakthrough. You must not surrender 1 minute before restoration. You must not abandon faith 1 minute before the answer arrives. Because history is filled with people who stopped too soon. People who gave up inches before success. People who walked away moments before opportunity. people who quit right before everything changed. Don't let that become your story. Instead, choose faith, choose patience, choose perseverance, choose hope. Even when you don't see evidence, even when circumstances look impossible, even when progress seems invisible, because invisible progress is still progress. Seeds grow underground long before anyone sees a harvest, and perhaps that's exactly what's happening in your life right now. Roots are growing, strength is developing, foundations are forming, preparation is taking place, and when the time is right, the results will become visible. Not because you forced them, not because you manipulated circumstances, not because you chased validation, but because heaven opened the door, and when heaven opens a door, no person can permanently close it. No enemy can stop it. No obstacle can prevent it. No circumstance can destroy it. That's the power of divine timing. And 11:59 is almost over, and that's exactly why the pressure has felt so intense. Because there is something the enemy never wants a chosen one to discover. He never wants you to realize how close you actually are. If he can convince you that nothing is changing, you'll stop looking for signs. If he can convince you that God has forgotten you, you'll stop expecting miracles. If he can convince you that the delay is permanent, you'll abandon the promise. And if he can convince you to quit, he never has to worry about your breakthrough. That is why spiritual warfare becomes strongest just before transition. Not because you're losing, but because something is ending. Think about every storm you've ever experienced. There is often a moment when the wind becomes stronger before the weather finally changes. A final burst, a final push, a final attempt to maintain control, and many chosen ones are experiencing that right now. Maybe you've noticed it. Old fears suddenly returning, unexpected distractions appearing, people creating unnecessary drama, negative thoughts becoming louder, opportunities seeming delayed at the last moment, situations that make absolutely no sense, and you've been asking yourself, why now? Why is this happening? Why does everything seem harder? Because transitions create turbulence. Airplanes experience turbulence when changing altitude. Ships experience turbulence when crossing difficult waters. And spiritually, people often experience turbulence when moving into a new season. The turbulence doesn't mean you're off course. It often means you're moving. Chosen one. There is something powerful I need you to understand. Your current circumstances are not the final chapter. They're not even the whole story. They're merely a page, one page, and too many people make permanent decisions based on temporary situations. They judge their future by today's challenges. They judge their destiny by current obstacles. They judge God's faithfulness by present emotions. But feelings change, circumstances change, seasons change, and often the very thing causing pain today becomes the testimony that inspires others tomorrow. Look back at your life. There were seasons you thought would destroy you, moments you thought you'd never recover from, losses you thought you'd never survive. Yet somehow, you're still here, not because the journey was easy, not because you had all the answers, but because God carried you through what should have broken you. And if He carried you then, why would He abandon you now? He wouldn't, He hasn't, and He won't. The problem is that heaven often works differently than we expect. We want immediate answers, immediate clarity, immediate solutions, immediate breakthroughs. But heaven focuses on transformation before manifestation, because who you become is often more important than what you receive. Imagine receiving everything you've prayed for while still carrying the fears, doubts, and limitations of your old season. Eventually, those blessings would be damaged by unresolved weaknesses. That's why preparation matters. That's why refinement matters. That's why growth matters. And that's why the waiting season has been necessary. Not enjoyable, not easy, but necessary. Because something inside you has been changing, even if you don't fully see it yet. You're not the same person you were a year ago. You're not the same person who entered this season. You're stronger now, wiser now, more discerning now, more resilient now, more aware now, and those changes didn't happen by accident. They happened because pressure revealed strengths you never knew you possessed. Sometimes God allows challenges not to punish us, but to reveal us, to show us what's already inside, to reveal courage, to reveal faith, to reveal endurance, to reveal purpose. And perhaps that's what this season has been doing for you, revealing who you truly are. Because chosen one. The world has spent a long time trying to tell you who you should be. People projected limitations onto you. People doubted you. People misunderstood you. People underestimated you. Some walked away from you. Some betrayed you. Some criticized you. Some secretly hoped you would fail. But none of those opinions have the authority to define your destiny. Only God has that authority. And what heaven says about you matters more than what any person says about you. The challenge is remembering that when life becomes difficult, it's easy to believe in purpose when everything is working. It's easy to trust when doors are opening. It's easy to have faith when blessings are visible. But true faith is developed when evidence is absent. True faith grows in uncertainty. True faith grows in waiting. True faith grows when circumstances say one thing and God says another. That's the kind of faith heaven has been developing inside you. The kind that survives storms. The kind that survives delays. The kind that survives disappointment. The kind that refuses to quit. Because what you're stepping into requires a stronger version of you, a wiser version of you, a more mature version of you. And that's exactly what God has been building. Now listen carefully, because the next sign of Spiritual 1159 is something many people completely overlook. You begin losing interest in things that once consumed your attention. People notice it. Friends notice it. Family notices it. Even you notice it. Things that once seemed important no longer feel important. Old arguments feel meaningless. Old habits feel empty. Old distractions lose their power. Why? Because your spirit recognizes that you're approaching a transition, and transitions require separation. Not everyone can go where you're going. Not every habit belongs in your next season. Not every relationship belongs in your future. Not every mindset belongs in your destiny. Sometimes heaven removes things before it adds things. And that process can feel lonely. It can feel confusing. It can even feel painful. But pruning always precedes growth. A gardener removes healthy branches not because the tree is failing, but because greater growth is coming. And perhaps that's what has been happening in your life. Perhaps certain people left because they completed their assignment. Perhaps certain doors closed because they were leading in the wrong direction. Perhaps certain opportunities disappeared because something better is being prepared. It's difficult to see in the moment, but clarity often arrives later. You'll look back one day and realize that what felt like rejection was actually redirection. What felt like loss was actually protection. What felt like delay was actually preparation. And what felt like an ending was actually a beginning. Because heaven sees what you cannot. Heaven knows what you do not. Heaven understands the entire story while you can only see one chapter. That's why trust is so important. Not blind trust, not passive trust, but active trust. The kind that says, I don't understand everything, but I believe God is still working. That mindset changes everything, because peace does not come from having all the answers. Peace comes from knowing who holds the answers, and chosen one. The one who holds your future has never lost control, not once, not ever, even when your life felt chaotic. Even when circumstances seemed impossible, even when everything appeared uncertain, God remained in control, and because He remained in control then, you can trust Him now. The next phase of your life will require that trust, because blessings often arrive in unexpected packages. Opportunities often appear disguised as challenges. Miracles often begin as problems. Open doors often appear where you least expect them. That's why discernment matters. That's why spiritual awareness matters. And that's why this message matters. Because many chosen ones are about to witness things they prayed for years ago, answers long delayed, Doors long closed, opportunities long awaited, restoration long hoped for, not because they earned it, not because they're perfect, but because the appointed time is approaching. The clock is moving, the season is shifting, and heaven is preparing to reveal what was hidden. So, if you've been tired, keep going. If you've been discouraged, keep believing. If you've been waiting, keep trusting. If you've been wondering whether anything is changing, remember this: the darkest hour of the night does not stop morning from arriving, and spiritual 11:59 never lasts forever. The clock keeps moving. Midnight eventually comes. The transition eventually happens. The breakthrough eventually arrives, and when it does, you'll understand why you had to endure this season. You'll understand why you couldn't quit. You'll understand why God kept telling you to hold on, because what was coming required every lesson you learned along the way. And chosen one, what is coming may be greater than anything you've imagined. What is coming may be greater than anything you've imagined. Read that again in your spirit. Not greater than some of the things you've imagined. Not slightly better than what you've been hoping for. Greater. Because one of the biggest mistakes chosen ones make is assuming that God's vision for their life is limited to what they can currently understand. But if God only did what you expected, there would be no need for faith. If heaven only moved within the boundaries of your imagination, there would be no room for miracles. And that is why some of the most important blessings arrive in forms we never anticipated. Chosen one. For a long time, you've been looking at your life through the lens of what happened to you: the betrayal, the disappointment, the rejection, the delays, the unanswered questions, the closed doors, the opportunities that slipped away, the relationships that ended, the dreams that seemed to collapse. And because you've been staring at those moments for so long, it became easy to believe that those events were defining your future. But they were never meant to define your future. They were only chapters, not conclusions. Pages, not endings. Experiences, not identities. You are not your worst day. You are not your greatest failure. You are not your deepest wound. You are not the mistake that still haunts your thoughts. You are not the rejection that broke your heart. You are not the criticism that damaged your confidence. You are not the season that nearly destroyed your faith. You are who God says you are. And perhaps that's exactly what heaven has been trying to teach you all along. Because before God changes your circumstances, He often changes your perspective. Before He transforms your environment, He transforms your thinking. Before He opens new doors, He teaches you how to walk differently. And right now, a shift is happening inside many chosen ones. A shift that cannot be fully explained. A shift that cannot be measured. A shift that begins in the spirit before it becomes visible in the physical world. Maybe you've noticed it. You don't react the same way anymore. Things that once triggered you have lost their power. Arguments that once consumed your energy no longer seem worth your attention. The opinions of people who doubted you don't carry the same weight. The need to prove yourself is beginning to disappear. The need for constant validation is fading, because your identity is no longer being built on what people think. It's being built on what God has spoken. And that's one of the strongest signs that spiritual maturity is taking place, because immature faith constantly seeks approval. Mature faith seeks purpose. Immature faith asks, why is this happening to me? Mature faith asks, what is this teaching me? Immature faith focuses only on the problem. Mature faith searches for the lesson and chosen one. You've learned lessons that many people never learn. Not because life was easy, but because life forced you to grow. You didn't ask for all the battles. You didn't ask for all the pain. You didn't ask for all the disappointments. Yet somehow those experiences shaped you into someone stronger, someone wiser, someone deeper, someone capable of helping others who are fighting similar battles. That's the thing about pain. Pain can either make a person bitter or make them better. And despite everything you've faced, you're still here searching for hope, still searching for purpose, still searching for God's voice. That says something powerful about your spirit, because many people become hardened after disappointment. Many people stop believing after heartbreak. Many people stop trusting after betrayal. Many people stop dreaming after failure, but you're still standing, and heaven sees that. Every moment you chose faith over fear. Every moment you chose love over bitterness. Every moment you chose hope over despair. Every moment you refused to quit. Heaven saw it all, and none of it was wasted. Not one tear, not one prayer, not one sleepless night, not one moment of uncertainty. Because God specializes in using what others would throw away. The broken pieces, the forgotten people, the rejected dreamers, the wounded warriors, the overlooked servants, the individual society underestimated. Again and again throughout history, God has chosen people who seemed unlikely, people others ignored, people others dismissed, people others counted out. Why? Because when God works through someone unexpected, nobody can deny where the glory came from. And perhaps that's why your journey has looked different from everyone else's. Maybe that's why your path hasn't been easy. Maybe that's why you've had to fight battles that others never understood. Because your story was never meant to be ordinary. Your testimony was never meant to be average. Your purpose was never meant to blend into the crowd. You were called to stand out, and standing out often comes with challenges. It often comes with isolation. It often comes with misunderstanding. It often comes with seasons where nobody seems to understand what God is doing in your life. Those seasons can feel lonely, very lonely. There may have been nights when you felt completely alone, nights when nobody called, nights when nobody checked on you, nights when you felt forgotten, nights when your heart carried burdens too heavy to explain, and maybe you smiled during the day while silently breaking inside. Maybe you told everyone you were fine because explaining the truth felt impossible. Maybe you became so used to carrying everything yourself that asking for help felt uncomfortable. If that's you, hear this. God saw those nights. He saw the tears nobody else saw. He heard the prayers nobody else heard. He understood the pain you couldn't put into words. And he stayed with you through all of it. Even when you couldn't feel his presence. Even when you doubted. Even when you questioned. Even when you felt abandoned. He never left. Because God's presence is not determined by your emotions. His faithfulness is not dependent on your feelings. His promises do not disappear because circumstances become difficult, and that's important to remember as you move into this next season. Because the next season will require confidence. Not arrogance. Confidence. The confidence that comes from knowing who walks beside you. The confidence that comes from surviving what should have destroyed you. The confidence that comes from understanding that your story is still unfolding. Too many chosen ones spend years apologizing for taking up space, apologizing for dreaming, apologizing for believing, apologizing for expecting more from life. But there comes a moment when heaven says, stop shrinking, stop minimizing your calling, stop doubting your purpose, stop talking yourself out of opportunities, stop acting like you were created for less. Because you were not created merely to survive. You were created to fulfill an assignment that nobody else can complete exactly the way you can. That's why comparison is so dangerous. Comparison convinces people to abandon their own journey while trying to imitate someone else's. Comparison steals joy. Comparison steals confidence. Comparison steals gratitude. Comparison steals focus. And perhaps that's why God allowed certain seasons of isolation in your life. Not to punish you, but to separate your voice from all the noise, to teach you how to hear him clearly, to teach you how to trust his direction, to teach you how to walk by faith instead of public opinion. Because where you're going, you'll need that skill. There will always be critics. There will always be doubters. There will always be people who misunderstand your assignment. But if God called you, their approval is not required. And that's a lesson many chosen ones are finally beginning to understand. They're no longer chasing acceptance. They're chasing purpose. They're no longer obsessed with fitting in. They're focused on fulfilling their calling. They're no longer asking everyone for permission. They're listening for God's direction. That shift changes everything. Because purpose creates clarity. Purpose creates endurance. Purpose creates courage, and courage is essential for the season ahead. Because the blessing you've been praying for may require you to leave familiar territory. It may require you to trust God in new ways. It may require you to step through doors that feel intimidating. It may require you to release old versions of yourself. Growth always requires release. You cannot become who you're meant to be while clinging to everything you used to be. Some mindsets must be released. Some fears must be released. Some wounds must be healed. Some chapters must be closed. Not because they weren't important, but because they are no longer your future. And chosen one. I believe heaven is preparing many of you for exactly that kind of transition. A transition from fear to faith, from confusion to clarity, from survival to purpose, from waiting to movement, from questioning to confidence. The process may not happen overnight, but it has already begun. That's why your spirit feels different. That's why old distractions no longer satisfy you. That's why you can sense change approaching even if you cannot fully explain it. Your spirit recognizes what your eyes have not yet seen, and soon, the visible world will begin catching up with what heaven has already started. So don't quit now. Don't stop now. Don't walk away now. You've come too far. You've survived too much. You've grown too much. You've learned too much. And God has invested too much into your journey. The chapter ahead carries things the previous chapters could never contain. New opportunities, new strength, new wisdom, new favor, new purpose, new possibilities. And one day you'll look back at this season and realize something incredible. The season that almost broke you became the season that built you. The season that made you cry became the season that made you stronger. The season you wanted to escape became the season that prepared you. And that's when you'll understand why God kept telling you to hold on. Because He could. Because He could see what was coming. Even when you couldn't. Even when every visible sign seemed to point in the opposite direction. Even when the road ahead looked uncertain. Even when your prayers felt unanswered. Even when your heart was carrying questions that nobody could answer. God could see what was coming, and that changes everything. Chosen one. One of the hardest parts of the journey is accepting that God sees the entire picture while we only see a single frame. We see today's struggle. God sees tomorrow's victory. We see the closed door. God sees the better door ahead. We see the delay. God sees the protection hidden inside it. We see the disappointment. God sees the redirection. And because we can only see a small portion of the story, it's easy to become discouraged. It's easy to assume that nothing is happening. It's easy to believe that the waiting is pointless. But what if the waiting season was never empty? What if more was happening behind the scenes than you realize? Think about all the moments in your life that only made sense later. At the time, they felt confusing, painful, unfair, sometimes even devastating. Yet years later, you looked back and understood why they happened. You understood why certain people left, why certain opportunities disappeared, why certain plans failed, why certain doors closed, and what once felt like a tragedy became a testimony. What once felt like rejection became protection. What once felt like an ending became a new beginning. That's the power of perspective. And perspective is one of the gifts heaven develops during seasons of waiting. Because without perspective, people often misinterpret the process. They think the fire is destroying them when it's actually refining them. They think the pressure is crushing them when it's actually strengthening them. They think the delay is punishment when it's actually preparation. And perhaps that's exactly where some of you are right now. You're in a season that doesn't make sense. A season that has raised more questions than answers. A season where you've had to trust God without understanding what He's doing. And if we're being honest, that's difficult. Very difficult, because human nature wants certainty. We want to know how everything will work out. We want guarantees. We want timelines. We want clear explanations. But faith doesn't operate that way. Faith asks you to keep moving even when details are missing. Faith asks you to trust before understanding arrives. Faith asks you to believe before evidence appears. And that is exactly what many chosen ones have been doing. Not perfectly, not without doubt, not without questions, but you've kept moving. You've kept praying. You've kept believing. You've kept showing up, even on the days when you felt exhausted, even on the days when hope felt distant, even on the days when your heart felt heavy. You kept going, and heaven sees that. Never underestimate the power of simply refusing to quit. Sometimes survival itself is a victory. Sometimes getting back up is a victory. Sometimes choosing faith one more time is a victory. And those victories matter because they reveal something important about your character. They reveal resilience. They reveal perseverance. They reveal spiritual strength. They reveal a heart that refuses to surrender. And those qualities cannot be purchased. They cannot be borrowed. They cannot be inherited. They are developed, forged through experience, forged through hardship, forged through battles, forged through seasons that tested everything you believed. Chosen one. The truth is that many people would have quit if they had faced what you faced. Many people would have walked away. Many people would have abandoned the dream. Many people would have stopped believing. But somehow you're still here. That matters more than you realize, because survival is evidence of purpose. There is a reason you've made it this far. There is a reason you're still standing. There is a reason your story continues. And that reason is bigger than your current circumstances. Now listen carefully, because there is something God often does before a major breakthrough. He begins changing the person before changing the situation. Most people pray for changed circumstances. But heaven often focuses first on creating a changed person. Why? Because sustainable blessings require sustainable character. Imagine receiving everything you've prayed for while still thinking the way you did 5 years ago. Imagine receiving influence without wisdom, success without humility, opportunity without discipline, resources without responsibility. Those blessings could quickly become burdens. That's why preparation matters, and that's why this season has been so important. Even if it felt slow, even if it felt frustrating, even if it felt unfair, something inside you has been changing. You may not fully see it yet, but others do. People notice your strength. People notice your growth. People notice your wisdom. People notice your peace, even when you don't notice it yourself. Because growth often feels invisible from the inside, it's easier to see how far others have come than to recognize your own transformation. Yet transformation has been happening, little by little, day by day, lesson by lesson, prayer by prayer. You are becoming someone different. Someone stronger, someone wiser, someone more prepared for what lies ahead. And that's why the next season cannot be approached with the mindset of the previous season. The old fears cannot go with you. The old limitations cannot go with you. The old insecurities cannot go with you. The old identity cannot go with you, because where God is taking you requires a new level of thinking, a new level of faith, a new level of confidence. Not confidence in yourself alone. Confidence in God's ability to work through you. That's an important distinction. Because true confidence isn't arrogance. Arrogance says, I don't need God. Confidence says, with God, I can face whatever comes. And chosen one. You are stronger than you think. Not because life has been easy, but because you've survived what should have broken you. You have survived seasons that nobody knows about, battles that nobody witnessed, moments that nobody understood. You carried burdens in silence. You fought battles in secret. You cried tears nobody saw. Yet somehow you kept moving. That kind of strength doesn't come from comfort. It comes from endurance. It comes from faith. It comes from experience. And now those experiences are becoming part of your preparation. Because one day someone else will face a battle you've already survived. Someone else will feel the same fear, the same confusion, the same heartbreak, the same uncertainty, and your testimony will become their hope. Your story will become their encouragement. Your survival will become their evidence that victory is possible. Never underestimate the value of your story. Never underestimate the power of your journey. The things you've endured were not meaningless. The lessons you've learned were not accidental. The battles you fought were not wasted. God has a way of using everything, even the painful parts, especially the painful parts. Because scars often become proof of survival, and survivors carry a unique kind of wisdom, a wisdom that cannot be learned from books, a wisdom that comes only from experience, a wisdom that comes from walking through storms and discovering that God remained faithful. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. God remained faithful, not occasionally, not sometimes, always, even when you couldn't see it, even when you doubted it, even when circumstances suggested otherwise. He remained faithful, and he remains faithful now, which means the promise is still alive, the purpose is still alive, the calling is still alive, the dream is still alive, the future is still alive. No delay can kill what God has ordained. No obstacle can destroy what heaven has spoken. No opposition can cancel divine purpose. People may resist it. Circumstances may challenge it. Time may test it. But what God has planned will not be defeated. That's why you must keep moving forward. Not because everything is easy, but because your future deserves your faith. And perhaps, chosen one, that is exactly what this season has been teaching you. To trust even when understanding is incomplete. To believe even when evidence is limited. To hope even when circumstances appear uncertain, because the closer you get to breakthrough, the more important those lessons become. The clock is still moving. The season is still shifting, and heaven is still working, even now, especially now.